And now I'm going to ask someone else to come and talk about another set of challenges that we face. Darakshan does a lot of work with domestic violence and victimization groups and narratives. And we're going to ask Darakshan to come and talk to us on what local communities can do to help push forward the conversation around violence and specifically domestic violence as well. Darakshan.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for being the Debbie Downer of this conversation. Whenever I go places, trust me, a lot of friends are like, we don't want to hear about child abuse, please. This is a nice gathering. Now, I also don't want to spend too much time on myself. What I'll say is I'm Pakistani-born, Bronx-bred, DC-based right now. In terms of my work, I do it all the time, 80, 90 hours a day. But what I'm here, yeah, in DC, we have no life. Everybody just works all day long. Now, in terms of, I'm also not tolerant. I'm not tolerant against injustice. I have no tolerance for hate. And what I want to talk to you all about is violence. Violence that is ripping our country apart. As we've seen yesterday what happened in Connecticut, where people who have access to guns, military weapons, are moving into our schools, are going into our faith-based places like gurdwaras and mosques, places like movie theaters and malls. But while these cases make it to the mainstream, there are communities in this country that live under the grip of gang violence and gun violence, whose stories are never told on the mainstream media. And before that, we also know there are millions of people in this country living alone whose homes are nothing short of war zones. We know annually, every single day, 10 million children across the world see domestic violence. We know the #1 reason in this country for pregnant women to be killed is at the hand of intimate partner violence. And internationally, we know that up to 7 in 8 women will face abuse in their lifetime. So why am I here to talk to you? My mainstream job, what I do is I actually work at the Urban Institute. I primarily conduct evaluations for the federal government on how we're responding to crime victims, particularly elder abuse, sexual assault, and also juveniles. And in my work, what I saw was nobody was talking about crime victimization in the Muslim community. What about our safety? What happens when a Muslim is actually a victim of crime? Does law enforcement respond or not? So that's why I did this study. I did it for Safe Nation Collaborative to create a training for our criminal justice system and also victim advocacy organizations. So they're informed of the issues in our community and also what has happened post 9/11 with Islamophobia. And so therefore, I did this study, and what I'm finding, and I want to begin with Shayma's case. Because when Shayma's case initially happened, I was so inspired by the way our community responded. Primarily because we came together, we had vigils, we even went across racial lines. We said Shayma is our Trayvon. But then as soon as information came out that this was a domestic violence case, we completely took ourselves out of the conversation and said, Islam does not allow for abuse. Absolutely true. But you know what? There are many Muslims living in this country where abuse is a reality for them. Actually, recent studies have shown us 1 in 2 American Muslims has reported that they have went through abuse in their lifetime. 66% of the same group said that they know of someone currently being abused. 80% of community leaders said, from imams, chaplains, that they're receiving cases of domestic violence and child abuse. It's the same thing I found in my study. The #1 issue our community is facing, domestic violence, child abuse. Now, while this case got media attention, there's another case actually. We could go to the next slide. I don't have the pointer, but I'll just go into the case. This is 10-year-old Abdi Fatah Muhammad. And the reason I want to talk about his case is I think of him as a soldier trying to escape abuse. In the past year, he called 911 twice. He came to his Islamic school with 2 black eyes. They recommended this case over to Child Protective Services, and his case file stood there for 9 months. Nobody did anything. And then lastly, he tried to escape abuse. He left his home. He ran, a 10-year-old. And you know what happened? Someone in the community brought him right back to his home. Little did this person know that they were bringing him back to his death. Let me tell you how his stepfather murdered this boy. He tied him to a chair with an electrical cord, put a sock in his mouth, took a rolling pin until this boy's skull was disconnected from his spinal cord. Now I want to know, this year, many Muslims across the world, rightfully so, got up and said, "How dare you disrespect our prophet?" But this young boy named our prophet, look what is happening to him. How many people in our community protested this? I'm not willing to say child protective service. Maybe race has something. Maybe this is a young black boy. Maybe it's because he's Muslim and they thought that Islam is allowed, abuse is allowed in Islam. But even if that's not the case, in the cases that our child protective services agencies don't have the funding or the enough manpower to go out there and do this work, then I want to know, why as a country are we sending millions of dollars to kill other people's babies across the world but can't save anybody here? I want to know that. Okay? And simultaneously, as a researcher, I'm coming across cases, directors of women's shelter who are telling me that in more than 10 years of the work they've done in our community, and God bless them, and Allah give them so much more strength to do this, have told me that whenever an imam said to these women, "Go back to the abusive relationship," no one ever heard from these women again. As a Muslim woman myself, I see how we are presented in mainstream media. People attack our right to the hijab, and then there are people who support our right to the hijab. But I want to know who is talking to our right to life. Who is speaking to that? Now, I don't want to get up here and just say how bad the situation or the problem is. I do want to talk about how many people in our community are also coming together and doing this work. Not enough. Places like people like Rabina Niaz in New York City. Let's think for a second. We have millions of Muslims in America. We have an increasing population. Why can I count the number of shelters for Muslims on my hands? Why are there no more social services? Our imams are 1 out of 2 Muslims go to a mosque. Our imams have to respond to way beyond just pastoral counseling. They have to do mental health services, drug abuse issues, domestic violence. I want to know, why isn't there instituted that we train our imams so that they can adequately help people when they come in the mosque? And for those who don't come, why don't we form partnerships with mainstream victim services organizations? I've only moved in mainstream victim services organizations, and every time I did, I always asked them, "Do you get Muslims coming in the door?" And they always dismissed us. You know why? Because post 9/11, the only thing our community is so-called good for is either we're perpetrators, we're either terrorists, or we are about to be terrorists. That's the only framing we talk of Muslims. But nobody talks about the fact when people tell me that there are Muslims in New York City that called 911 and no one responded because they said, "You quote unquote sound Muslim." There are judges in this country that did not give orders of protection because they said Islam allowed for abuse. That's how dire the situation is. But coming back to Rabina Niaz, as I spoke to her post 9/11, based in New York City, first organization to work with Muslim women in New York City, by the way. And what I love about her model is she's not only working directly with women, she's also doing anti-hate crime, anti-bullying work. And why is that important? Because one of the things that we're seeing increase in hate crimes is a lot of bullying against young Muslim youth. So we have to do anti-bullying work if we're going to talk about Islamophobia or hate crimes. There's another person I came across, so inspired. Even in mainstream victim services organizations, we don't talk about male victims. We don't talk about male sexual abuse. We don't talk about faith-based frameworks to drug abuse, to how do you bring the person from being a victim to a survivor, to a thriver. And so this project is called Project Madad Yar. They're particularly men going out, engaging men in mosques. They're talking to them about male sexual abuse. They're trying to engage more men. But that's not enough. We need everybody in the community. So I want to ask you all how you can all contribute. We need a shift in our attitude. We cannot say Shema is an individual case. We have to say that as a community, this is our issue. We have to talk about it. And in terms of my vision, I sat there, I said, we're gonna have more direct services. Not only more direct services, we're gonna give trainings to our imams. I don't believe our imams don't care, they do. They have a lot that they're doing right now. We have to equip them. But not only that, but let's talk about, that's just internal community. We need to go to Office of Victim Services We need to have mainstream your local teams. I used to be a SART advocate. I used to be in a hospital responding to rape crisis victims. We need to make connections with mainstream people who are already developed. Train them how to work with our community. Train them on the sensitivity. And then, as Alejandro mentions for research, we need strong evaluations. It's not good enough to say that we're doing good work. We have to evaluate it, make blueprints, so that other people who are interested know the process, have outcome evaluations so we can get $500,000 funding, not only here, but abroad as well. Because this is not just an American issue, a Muslim issue, this is a worldwide issue. But you know what? Everything that I said to you, in this country, it took 49 years for that to happen. And you know why it happened? Because of cases like Shema and 10-year-old Abdi Fatah. Other rural communities in this country came together. They said, not in our name. We're tired. We're tired of our young children. And so small communities inspired communities other places. And then states started paying attention. And after states started paying attention, the federal government in the 70s passed something against child abuse. In the 90s said women would not be murdered anymore. And I'll tell you, someone trying to create a national system, reporting system on elder abuse. 2010 is when we passed the law saying elders would have a right to a life free of violence. It took that long. And while this work was happening here, communities all over the world started caring. And that's why the United Nations made protocols so there would be no more violence. But you know what? I know I'm here talking about fast forward 20 years. I believe we can do this in 10 years, 5 years. But that timeline is all going to come down to us and our attitudes. The moment we start acknowledging the problem, we can start healing this problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darakshan, for those inspiring words. And we've heard about a set of challenges